We don't need you. Those four words shattered Marco DeLuca more completely than any bullet ever could. Sitting across from his wife in a pristine law office, the most feared man in the city watched Elena Moretti sign away their marriage with the same quiet strength that had once drawn him to her. He thought he understood rejection. He thought he understood loss. But 6 months later, when he saw her carrying his child, a child she'd hidden from him, choosing survival over his protection, Marco realized he'd understood nothing at all. This is the story of a man who controlled an empire but couldn't control his own heart, and the woman who proved that the most dangerous thing you can do to a powerful man is show him he was never needed at all. If you want to see how far a person will go to protect what matters most, stay until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The law office smelled like expensive leather and regret. Marco DeLuca sat perfectly still in the chair that cost more than most people's monthly rent, his dark suit immaculate, his hands resting loosely on the armrests. To anyone watching, he appeared completely composed, the picture of a man in control. His attorney, Bernard Hastings, shuffled papers nervously at the head of the conference table, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Across from Marco, separated by 8 feet of polished mahogany that might as well have been an ocean, Elena Moretti signed her name with steady, deliberate strokes. Mrs. Elena DeLuca, the signature read, for the last time. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, painting everything in shades of gold that felt obscene given the moment. The river beyond sparkled indifferently. Somewhere in the building below, people went about their ordinary lives. Paralegals fetching coffee, secretaries scheduling appointments, clients worrying about prenuptial agreements and custody battles. Normal people with normal problems. Marco dealt in different problems entirely. That's the last one, Bernard said quietly, gathering the documents with hands that trembled slightly. He'd represented the DeLuca family for 15 years and had never looked more uncomfortable. I'll file these with the court this afternoon. The waiting period is 60 days, but given the circumstances, I don't anticipate any complications. The circumstances. A diplomatic way of saying that when Marco DeLuca wanted something done, it got done. Judges didn't ask questions. Clerks didn't create delays. The machinery of the legal system moved with remarkable efficiency when properly motivated. Elena set down the pen, Marco's pen, a Mont Blanc he'd given her on their first anniversary, and folded her hands in her lap. She wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry except the wedding ring she'd already removed and placed in a small velvet box on the table between them. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, emphasizing the elegant lines of her face. She looked tired, but not defeated. Resolved, but not broken. That was what had always set Elena apart from everyone else in Marco's world. She didn't break. She didn't bend. She simply decided, and then she acted. "Thank you, Bernard," she said, her voice carrying that slight musical quality that had first caught Marco's attention 3 years ago in a gallery downtown. She'd been standing in front of a painting of a storm-tossed ship, and when he'd approached, she'd smiled and said, "Beautiful things surviving terrible circumstances. There's something hopeful in that, don't you think?" He'd married her 6 months later. Now she stood, smoothing her dress with hands that didn't shake. Marco remained seated, watching her with the same intensity he brought to everything, cataloging details, searching for weaknesses, trying to understand the game being played. Because there was always a game, always an angle. "Elena," he said, the first word he'd spoken since arriving. His voice was low, controlled, carrying the weight of authority that made grown men reconsider their life choices. "We should talk." "We just did." She picked up her purse, a modest leather bag she'd owned since before their marriage. She'd never wanted the designer accessories he'd offered, never wanted the clothes or jewelry or any of the trappings that came with being Mrs. Marco DeLuca. "Everything that needed to be said is in the settlement agreement." The settlement agreement talks about property division and financial arrangements. Marco rose now, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of controlled grace that came from years of discipline. "It doesn't talk about why." Elena's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her dark eyes, not anger, not pain, something closer to disappointment. "You really don't know?" "Enlighten me." Bernard cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should give you two some privacy. Stay, Marco said, not looking away from Elena. Bernard sat back down immediately. Elena shook her head slightly, a gesture that might have been pity or simply exhaustion. This is exactly why, Marco. You think everything is a negotiation. You think if you just find the right words, the right pressure points, you can control the outcome. She moved toward the door, and Marco felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to panic. But some things can't be controlled. Some things shouldn't be. I never tried to control you. She stopped, her hand on the door handle, and for a moment Marco thought she might actually laugh. Instead, she turned back and her expression was almost gentle, almost sad. You controlled everything, Marco. Every room you walk into, every person you speak to, every situation you encounter. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer. I don't blame you for it. It's who you are. It's probably what's kept you alive this long. But I can't... Her voice caught slightly, the first crack in her composure. I can't live in a world where everything is a threat to be managed and everyone is a piece to be moved. I can't be someone's possession, even if you'd call it protection. It was never like that, wasn't it? Elena's smile was sad. You chose restaurants for us, routes to drive, which friends I could see. You told yourself it was about keeping me safe, and maybe you even believed it. But safety isn't the same as freedom, Marco. And I need to be free more than I need to be safe. The words hung in the air between them, and Marco found himself without a response. In his world, safety was the highest currency. Freedom was an illusion people clung to before they understood how dangerous the world really was. He'd given Elena safety, security, a life without material concerns. He thought that was enough. He'd been wrong. So that's it? He asked, and hated how the question sounded, almost like pleading. 3 years, and you just walk away? Elena's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. I'm not walking away from 3 years, Marco. I'm walking towards something else, something that's mine, something you can't protect or control or manage. She pulled open the door, and the sounds of the office building filtered in, phones ringing, conversations humming, the elevator chiming down the hall. Normal sounds, safe sounds. I hope you find what you're looking for. I really do. Elena, we don't need you. The words were spoken quietly, without heat or anger, but they hit Marco like a physical blow. We. Not I. We. He started to ask who we meant, what person or people she'd aligned herself with, what life she'd built in the shadows of their marriage. But she was already gone, the door closing softly behind her. The click of the latch sounded final. Bernard stood slowly, gathering his documents with the careful movements of a man trying not to draw attention to himself. I'm sorry, Marco. I know this isn't... Leave. Of course. I'll call you when... Now. Bernard left quickly, practically fleeing the office, and Marco was alone with the silence and the sunlight and the small velvet box containing a wedding ring. He picked up the box, opened it. The diamond caught the light, throwing tiny rainbows across his palm. He'd spent 3 months choosing this ring, consulting with jewelers in New York and Amsterdam, searching for something worthy of the woman he'd decided to marry. Elena had cried when he'd given it to her, had whispered yes against his mouth, had looked at him like he was something more than the sum of his reputation and his power. When had that look changed? When had she started seeing him the way everyone else did, as a man who controlled rather than protected, who possessed rather than loved? Marco closed the box with a sharp snap and slipped it into his pocket. He moved to the windows, looking down at the street 20 floors below. The city sprawled in every direction, glittering in the afternoon sun. His city in all the ways that mattered. DeLuca influence touched every corner. The construction contracts, the labor unions, the shipping ports, the legitimate businesses that provided cover for less legitimate enterprises. For 15 years, Marco had built an empire his father would have envied. He'd survived challenges from rival families, investigations from federal agencies, betrayals from within his own organization. He'd done what needed to be done, made the choices that kept power consolidated and threats neutralized. And he'd thought Elena understood. She'd known who he was when they'd met, known what he did, even if they never spoke the details aloud. She'd married him anyway, had smiled at him across their wedding reception while men who'd killed for him toasted their happiness. But maybe she'd never really understood. Or maybe she'd understood perfectly, and that was the problem. His phone buzzed. Marco pulled it out, glanced at the screen. Dominic, his second-in-command and oldest friend. Meeting moved up. Russo family. Tonight at 9. Marco typed back. Confirmed. Business continued. The world kept turning. Life moved forward, with or without Elena Moretti in it. He told himself it was better this way, cleaner. She'd wanted freedom, and now she had it. She'd made her choice, signed the papers, walked away with her settlement and her dignity and whatever we she'd been referring to. Some new life, some fresh start. Something untainted by his world. And Marco could go back to what he did best. Maintaining control, managing threats, building his empire higher and stronger. No distractions, no vulnerabilities, no one to look at him with disappointment when he made the hard choices. The river below sparkled indifferently, and Marco turned away from the window. He had work to do. Russo family negotiations wouldn't handle themselves, and weakness, even perceived weakness in the form of a divorce, needed to be countered with strength. He'd make sure every family in the city understood that Marco DeLuca was unchanged, unshaken, still the same force they'd learned to respect. He left the law office without looking back, his footsteps silent on expensive carpet. In the elevator, descending toward the parking garage where Vincent waited with the car, Marco checked his reflection in the polished steel doors. His expression was composed, unreadable, exactly what it needed to be. The man looking back at him was in complete control. The man looking back at him had everything handled. The man looking back at him was fine. 6 months later. The restaurant was one of Marco's. Not officially, not on any paperwork that could be traced, but everyone knew. Bellini's occupied a prime corner lot in the financial district, all exposed brick and low lighting and prices that kept out anyone who didn't understand that the food was secondary to the privacy. It was the kind of place where deals got made over ossobuco and Barolo, where conversations happened that would never appear in any courtroom. Marco sat in his usual booth in the back corner, positioned to see both entrances and most of the dining room. Old habits. Useful habits. Across from him, Anthony Russo worked his way through a plate of pasta with the focused attention of a man who genuinely appreciated good food. The thing about the waterfront contract, Anthony said between bites, is that we need to make sure the union understands the timeline. My people are ready to move, but if there are delays, there won't be. Marco sipped his wine, barely tasting it. The union leadership knows what's expected. They'll deliver. Anthony nodded, satisfied. The Russo family had been competitors once, but time and careful negotiation had turned them into something closer to partners. Not friends. Marco didn't have friends in this business, but reliable allies with aligned interests. The waterfront development represented tens of millions in potential revenue, split carefully down the middle. I heard about you and Elena, Anthony said, and Marco's attention sharpened. Sorry about that. Divorce is never easy. It's handled. Still, 3 years. That's a decent run. Anthony reached for his wine, pausing when he noticed Marco's expression. What? Too soon for jokes? Just not interested in discussing my personal life. Fair enough. Anthony raised his glass. To business partnerships and knowing when to cut losses. Marco didn't toast. Instead, he glanced around the dining room out of habit, cataloging faces and postures and the subtle dynamics that told him who was important and who was filler. Bellini's on a Thursday night drew the usual crowd, lawyers and bankers, a couple of city council members at a corner table, some tech executives who'd recently learned that success in legitimate business required the same relationship building as any other endeavor. And there, near the kitchen doors, taking an order from one of the banker tables, was a woman in a simple black dress with her dark hair pulled back. Elena. Marco went absolutely still. She moved with the same quiet grace he remembered, balancing a tray of drinks and navigating between tables with practiced ease. She smiled at something one of the customers said, the expression polite but distant, her work smile, not her real one. When she turned to head back toward the kitchen, Marco saw her profile clearly, saw the unmistakable curve of her belly beneath the black fabric. Pregnant. Visibly, obviously pregnant. At least 6 months, maybe more. The math assembled itself instantly in Marco's mind. The divorce had been finalized 4 months ago, after the 60-day waiting period. But they'd been separated for 2 months before that, living in different places, the marriage already over and everything but paperwork. 6 months pregnant meant conception around Marco? Anthony's voice came from very far away. You all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Marco forced his attention back to Anthony, forced his expression to remain neutral even though his pulse was hammering in his ears. Fine. Just remembered something I need to handle. He watched Elena disappear through the kitchen doors, his mind racing. She was working here, in his restaurant, carrying what had to be his child. The timing was too perfect, too precise. And she'd said nothing. Not during the divorce proceedings, not in any of the settlement negotiations, not in the 6 months since she'd walked out of that law office. We don't need you. The words took on new meaning now, sharp and cutting in a way he hadn't understood before. Not we as in Elena and some new partner. We as in Elena and the child she carried, his child. A child she'd deliberately kept from him. The waterfront timeline, Anthony was saying, oblivious to the fact that Marco's entire world had just shifted on its axis. We should probably sync up with the planning commission next week. Make sure... Excuse me? Marco stood abruptly, not bothering to make the movement seem casual. I need to handle something. We'll continue this later. Anthony blinked up at him, surprised but not stupid enough to ask questions. Sure. Yeah, I'll call you tomorrow. Marco was already moving, weaving between tables toward the back of the restaurant, toward the kitchen, toward answers. The kitchen at Bellini's was controlled chaos. Line cooks calling orders, pans clattering, the head chef barking corrections in Italian-accented English. Marco pushed through the swinging doors without hesitation, his presence causing immediate silence. Conversations died mid-sentence. Movement stilled. Everyone knew who Marco DeLuca was. Everyone understood what his presence in the kitchen meant. Out, Marco said quietly. The staff didn't need to be told twice. They filed out through the back entrance, leaving their stations, leaving Marco alone in the sudden quiet with the smell of garlic and roasting meat, and... Marco. He turned. Elena stood near the walk-in cooler, still holding her order pad, her expression unreadable. Up close, the pregnancy was even more obvious. She looked healthy, glowing in that way people always said pregnant women did. But tired, too. Dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. We need to talk, Marco said. We really don't. That's my child. Elena's expression didn't change, but her hand moved instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture that sent something hot and furious through Marco's chest. What makes you think that? The timing. The fact that you're here, in my restaurant, working instead of living off the settlement I gave you. Marco moved closer, and Elena held her ground. How long were you planning to hide this from me? I wasn't hiding anything. I've been working here for 3 months. It's not my fault you don't pay attention to your own businesses. Elena. Her name is Sophia now. She said it calmly, matter-of-factly. I went back to my maiden name, Moretti. I'm not your wife anymore, Marco. I'm not your anything. Except the mother of my child. Your child. Elena's laugh was bitter. You still think in terms of ownership. This baby... She pressed her hand more firmly against her belly. This baby is mine. Not ours. Mine. I'm the one carrying it. I'm the one who'll raise it. I'm the one who'll make sure it grows up far away from your world. The words hit harder than Marco expected. You can't do that. Watch me. They stared at each other in the empty kitchen, and Marco felt that same helpless fury he'd experienced in the law office 6 months ago. The sense that he was watching something precious slip away, and all his power, all his control, was completely useless. I can provide for you, he said, for both of you. You don't have to work here, don't have to... I want to work here. I want to earn my own money, live my own life, make my own choices. Elena's voice was steady. That's what freedom means, Marco. That's what I was trying to tell you. Freedom doesn't pay the bills. Freedom doesn't keep you safe. Maybe not. But your version of safety comes with chains. She moved toward the kitchen doors, toward the dining room and her tables, and the life she'd apparently built without him. I need to get back to work. Elena, Sophia, wait. She paused, not turning around. What? Marco had negotiated with rival families, with federal prosecutors, with people who wanted him dead. He'd talked his way out of situations that should have ended in bloodshed. But he couldn't find the right words now, couldn't figure out what to say that would make her understand. "This isn't over," he finally said. Sophia looked back over her shoulder, and her expression was almost pitying. "Yes, it is. It was over 6 months ago. You just didn't realize it." She pushed through the swinging doors, and Marco was alone again with the lingering heat from the stoves and the certainty that he'd just lost something he hadn't even known he was fighting for. He stood there for a long moment, his mind churning through options and strategies and possible approaches. He could force the issue, demand a paternity test, leverage legal rights, use his connections to... No. That was exactly what Sophia expected, what she was prepared for. The heavy hand, the show of power, the attempt to control the situation through force. Marco pulled out his phone, typed a message out to Vincent. Background check. Sophia Moretti. Everything. Then he left through the back entrance, avoiding the dining room and the questions Anthony would have. The alley behind Bellini's was dark, smelling of garbage and rain from earlier in the day. Vincent pulled up in the black sedan moments later, already knowing without being told that Marco was ready to leave. "Home?" Vincent asked. "Office." Marco settled into the back seat, his mind already working through the problem from every angle. Sophia was pregnant with his child and had deliberately kept it from him. She was working at his restaurant, either because she genuinely didn't know it was his, or because she was making some kind of point. She'd changed her name, taken her settlement, started over completely. And she'd said she didn't need him. The word still stung, still landed wrong. Marco had spent his entire adult life being needed. By his family, by his organization, by the businesses and people who depended on DeLuca protection and DeLuca resources. Need was what gave him purpose, what justified the things he did. But Sophia had looked at everything he offered and chosen struggle instead. Chosen freedom over safety. Chosen distance over his protection. Why? The question followed him into his office building, up the private elevator to the top floor where he conducted business that would never appear on any official record. His office was all dark wood and leather, windows looking out over the city he controlled. Dominic was waiting, sprawled in one of the chairs with his usual casual disregard for formality. "How'd it go with Russo?" "Fine. We have a different problem." "Yeah?" Dominic sat up, instantly alert. "What kind of problem?" Marco moved to the windows, looking down at the city lights. "Elena's pregnant." "Shit. Congratulations?" Or, "Wait, is it yours?" "Yes." "Okay. So what's the problem? That's good news, right? You wanted kids." Marco had mentioned it once, years ago, in an unguarded moment after too much whiskey. He'd thought about a son to teach, a daughter to protect. Family in the truest sense, not just the organization sense. "She didn't tell me," Marco said. "Deliberately kept it from me. She's working as a waitress at Bellini's, living off her settlement, planning to raise the child completely separate from me." Dominic whistled low. "Damn. That's cold. That's calculated." Marco turned back from the window. "She knows I'd want to be involved, knows I'd insist on providing for them. She's cutting me out before I can even try. So what are you going to do?" It was the question, wasn't it? The one that mattered. Marco had resources, connections, power. He could make Sophia's life difficult if he wanted, could force her hand in a dozen different ways. But every option felt wrong, felt like proving her point about control and possession and the chains that came with his protection. "Find out everything," Marco said finally. "Where she's living, what her routine is, who she's seeing. I want to know every detail of her life." "You want surveillance?" "I want information. There's a difference." Dominic nodded, pulling out his phone to start making arrangements. "And once you have the information?" Marco didn't have an answer to that. Not yet. The old Marco, the one from 6 months ago, would have moved decisively, would have inserted himself into Sophia's life whether she wanted it or not, would have justified it as protection, as responsibility, as doing what fathers were supposed to do. But Sophia's words kept echoing. Safety isn't the same as freedom. Maybe she was right. Maybe his version of protection really did come with chains. Maybe the only way to prove he was different, that he could be what she needed instead of what he thought she needed, was to respect the boundary she'd drawn, even if it killed him. Even if it meant watching from a distance while she carried his child, raised his child, built a life that specifically excluded him. Just get me the information, Marco said. We'll figure out the rest later. Dominic left to make calls, and Marco sat alone in his office with the city spread below him like a kingdom. He'd built all of this through careful planning and decisive action. He'd never hesitated, never second-guessed, never let sentiment interfere with necessary choices. But this was different. This was Sofia. This was his child. And for the first time in his life, Marco DeLuca didn't know what to do. His phone buzzed with a message from Vincent. Initial information. Sofia Moretti, 32, living in Brookside Apartment Complex, Unit 2B, working 3 jobs. Bellini's, weekend shift, at diner on 5th, occasional catering. No red flags, no associates of concern, living alone, 3 jobs, while pregnant, and still choosing that over accepting more help from him. Marco stared at the message for a long time, a strange ache building in his chest. Pride, maybe, or regret, or some combination of both that he didn't have a name for. We don't need you. But maybe, Marco thought, that was exactly why they did. He just had to figure out how to prove it. The information came in pieces over the following weeks, each detail another window into the life Sofia had built without him. She woke at 5:30 every morning, walked 3 blocks to catch the bus that took her to the diner on 5th Street where she worked breakfast shift. 6 to 11, slinging eggs and coffee to construction workers and early commuters. Then she'd take 2 buses across town to Bellini's, arriving by noon to prep for lunch service. On weekends, she picked up catering gigs, weddings, corporate events, standing for hours in uncomfortable shoes while carrying trays of appetizers. Marco read the reports in his office late at night, unable to shake the image of Sofia on her feet all day, pregnant and exhausted, choosing this punishing schedule over the alternative he represented. She's going to hurt herself, Dominic said, reading over Marco's shoulder. Working that hard, that pregnant. It's not safe. She knows that. Then why? Because accepting help from me would be worse than the risk. Marco set down the report. In her mind, at least. Dominic shook his head. That's pride talking. Stupid pride. Maybe. Marco thought about the way Sofia had looked at him in the kitchen at Bellini's, not with anger or fear, but with something closer to disappointment. Like he'd failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. Or maybe it's self-preservation. The surveillance continued because Marco couldn't seem to stop it, even though every instinct told him this was exactly the kind of control Sofia had been running from. He told himself he just needed to know she was safe, needed to understand her routine so he could position resources nearby without her knowing, needed to see the life she'd chosen to understand what he'd lost. But really, he just needed to see her. Vincent sent photos sometimes, always from a careful distance. Sofia at the bus stop in the early morning darkness, her coat pulled tight against the cold. Sofia leaving the diner with her tips folded into her apron pocket. Sofia sitting on a bench in the small park near her apartment, one hand resting on her belly, her expression peaceful in a way Marco didn't remember seeing during their marriage. That last image haunted him more than the others. She looked content, tired, struggling, working 3 jobs and living in a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that wasn't terrible but wasn't great, and she looked more at peace than she ever had in his penthouse. The baby's due in 3 months, Vincent reported one evening, catching Marco between meetings. She's seeing a doctor at County General, Dr. Patricia Chen. Good reputation, solid care, but it's not exactly what? Marco's voice was sharper than intended. Vincent hesitated. Not exactly where someone with her resources should be getting prenatal care. There are better facilities, private practices, places where she wouldn't have to wait 3 hours in a crowded waiting room. Marco knew what Vincent was carefully not saying. Places Marco could arrange, doctors he could pay, care he could provide if Sofia would just let him. But she wouldn't. She'd rather sit in County General with its fluorescent lighting and overworked staff than accept anything that came with his name attached. Keep monitoring, Marco said, but at a distance. I don't want her feeling watched. Boss, she's been feeling watched since the day we started this. She knows. Marco looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean, she's smart. She's noticed the same car near her apartment at different times. She's seen the guy at the bus stop who's there too consistently. She hasn't confronted anyone, hasn't changed her routine, but she knows. Vincent paused. Question is whether she's scared or just resigned. The thought of Sophia being afraid of him, of his surveillance, of the reach of his world, made something twist in Marco's chest. This wasn't what he wanted, wasn't what he'd intended. He'd told himself he was just being careful, just making sure she was safe. But Sophia had drawn a boundary, and he'd crossed it anyway. Had proven her right about everything she'd said in that law office 6 months ago. "Pull back the surveillance," Marco said abruptly. "Effective immediately." "Boss, I said pull back. She wants distance. She gets distance." Marco stood, moving to the window that had become his default position when thinking about Sophia. "But I want someone at County General, maintenance staff, security. I don't care. Someone who can be there if something goes wrong. That's still surveillance. That's precaution. There's a difference." Vincent didn't argue, just nodded and left to make the arrangements. Marco stayed at the window, watching the city lights blur in the distance. Somewhere out there, Sophia was finishing her shift at Bellini's, probably counting her tips, planning her next day. Living the life she'd chosen. The life that deliberately excluded him. His phone rang. Anthony Russo's name lit up the screen. "The waterfront deal is moving forward," Anthony said without preamble. "But we've got a complication. The union is pushing back on the timeline. They want assurances about—" "Handle it," Marco interrupted. "You know what needs to happen. Make it happen." There was a pause. "You all right, Marco? You seem distracted lately." "I'm fine." "Because if there's something affecting your focus—" "I said I'm fine." Marco forced his tone to level out. "The union wants assurances. Give them assurances. Bring in mediators if you need to. Just keep the project on schedule." After Anthony hung up, Marco stood in the silence of his office and acknowledged what he'd been avoiding for weeks. He wasn't fine. Hadn't been fine since seeing Sophia in that kitchen. Hadn't been fine since learning about the child, his child, that she was carrying without him. Everything in his world was about control, about managing variables and eliminating threats. But Sophia wasn't a variable to be managed. The baby wasn't a threat to be eliminated. And every tool Marco had, every skill he'd developed over 15 years of running this organization, was completely useless here. The next morning, Marco did something he hadn't done in years. He went somewhere unplanned. The diner on 5th Street was exactly what the reports had described. Chrome and cracked vinyl, a long counter with swivel stools, booths along the windows that looked out onto the street. The breakfast crowd was thinning out, just a few stragglers finishing coffee and reading newspapers. The smell of bacon and coffee hung heavy in the air. Sophia was refilling the coffee maker behind the counter when Marco walked in. She glanced up automatically, probably ready to greet a new customer with that professional smile, and froze when she recognized him. For a moment, they just stared at each other across the length of the diner. Then Sophia very deliberately finished pouring the coffee grounds, closed the machine, and turned to face him fully. "We're closed," she said, even though the sign clearly said otherwise and there were still customers in the booths. Marco moved to the counter, sliding onto one of the stools. "Coffee, please. Black." "We're out." "There's a fresh pot brewing right behind you." Sophia's jaw tightened, but she reached for a mug and poured. She set it in front of him with more force than necessary, coffee sloshing slightly over the rim. "What do you want, Marco?" "To talk." "We talked. At Bellini's, remember?" "That wasn't a conversation. That was an ambush." Marco wrapped his hands around the hot mug. "I was surprised. Said things I shouldn't have said the way I said them. And now you've had time to plan your approach." Sophia crossed her arms over her chest, or tried to. The movement was awkward with her belly in the way. She was bigger than she'd been at Bellini's, the pregnancy impossible to miss now. "So what's the strategy? Apology? Guilt? Threats disguised as concern?" "None of those things." "Then what?" Marco took a sip of coffee, buying time. He'd played this conversation out in his head a dozen different ways, prepared arguments and counter-arguments, rehearsed exactly what he wanted to say. But sitting here looking at Sophia in her diner uniform, with exhaustion written in every line of her body, all his preparation felt hollow. "I want to understand," he said finally. "That's all. I want to understand why you didn't tell me about the baby, why you're working 3 jobs when you don't have to, why you'd rather struggle than accept help." "You know why." "I know what you told me in the law office. I know what you think I am, what you think accepting help from me would mean. But I don't understand." Marco paused, searching for the right words. I don't understand how you can look at me, knowing I'm the father of your child, and think I'd ever do anything to hurt either of you. Sophia's expression softened slightly, not much, but enough to notice. I don't think you'd hurt us, Marco. Not intentionally. That's not... She sighed, leaning against the counter behind her. You still don't get it. It's not about whether you'd hurt us. It's about the world you live in, the things you do, the choices you make every day that you tell yourself are necessary. I've never lied to you about what I do. No, you haven't, and I appreciate that, I do. But knowing about it and living in it are two different things. She rested one hand on her belly, the gesture unconscious. When we were married, I could pretend, could tell myself that your business was separate from our life together, that the man you were with me was different from the man you were out there. But then I'd see you on the phone, making decisions about things I didn't want to know about. Or I'd meet your associates and see the way they looked at me, like I was a possession, something you owned that they needed to respect because of what it meant to you, not because of who I was. I never treated you like a possession. Didn't you? Sophia's smile was sad. Every time you told me which restaurant was safe enough, every time you insisted on certain routes or certain drivers, every time you made a decision for both of us without asking what I wanted, that was treating me like something to be protected and controlled, Marco. And I know you thought you were being loving. I know you thought you were being a good husband, but it suffocated me. The words hurt more than Marco expected. He thought his careful management of their life together had been reassuring, had shown Sophia how much he cared. Instead, it had driven her away. So you left, he said quietly. And now you're here, working yourself to exhaustion, living in an apartment that probably doesn't have decent security, taking buses in the dark. Making my own choices, Sophia interrupted. Yes, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. She poured herself a glass of water, her movements careful. I'd rather struggle and know that every decision is mine than live comfortably knowing that everything is controlled by someone else, even someone who loves me. And the baby? Marco couldn't keep the edge from his voice. What about what the baby needs? The baby needs a mother who's free to raise them without fear, without constantly looking over her shoulder, wondering if her child will grow up thinking that power and control are the same as love. Sophia met his eyes steadily. I grew up poor, Marco. Really poor. I know what struggle looks like, and I know how to survive it. What I don't know is how to raise a child in your world without them learning all the wrong lessons. A customer at one of the booths called out for a refill, and Sophia moved to handle it, leaving Marco alone at the counter with his cooling coffee. He watched her navigate the diner, pouring coffee and clearing plates, moving with practiced efficiency despite her pregnancy. The other waitress, an older woman with gray hair and tired eyes, said something that made Sophia laugh, a real laugh that lit up her whole face. She looked happy. Despite everything, despite the struggle and the long hours and the uncertainty, she looked genuinely, authentically happy in a way Marco didn't remember seeing during their marriage. When Sophia returned to the counter, Marco said, I pulled the surveillance. She blinked. What? The people watching you, following your routine. I pulled them back. You were right. It was invasive. It was exactly the kind of control you were talking about. Marco pushed his untouched coffee away. I kept telling myself it was about keeping you safe, but really, it was about maintaining some kind of connection, some way of being part of your life, even after you'd made it clear you didn't want me there. Sophia studied him carefully, searching his face for something. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm trying to learn, trying to understand what you need instead of just assuming I know. Marco stood, pulling out his wallet. I'm not asking to be part of your life, Sophia. I'm not asking for custody or visitation or any kind of formal arrangement. He paused, the words harder than any negotiation he'd ever conducted. I just want you to know that if you need anything, anything at all, I'm here. No strings, no control, just help if you want it. He left 2 20s on the counter, far more than the coffee cost, and turned toward the door. Marco. He stopped, looked back. Sophia's hand rested on her belly, her expression conflicted. I don't know if I can trust that, she said softly. I want to, but I don't know if you're capable of helping without controlling. It's not how you're wired. Maybe not, Marco acknowledged, but I can try. For you, for the baby, I can at least try. He left before she could respond, stepping out into the cold morning air. Vincent was waiting across the street in the car, but Marco waved him off and started walking. He needed to think, needed to figure out what trying actually looked like when everything in his world was built on the foundation of control. The weeks that followed were strange. Marco found himself monitoring his own instincts, catching himself before he made calls to check on Sophia, before he arranged things without her knowledge. It was harder than he'd expected, like trying to unlearn a language he'd spoken his entire adult life. Work continued. The waterfront deal moved forward despite union complications. The Russo partnership deepened. Other opportunities emerged. Other challenges required attention. Marco handled it all with his usual efficiency, but part of his mind was always elsewhere, always wondering how Sophia was doing, whether she was still working 3 jobs, whether the baby was healthy. He heard through Vincent, who heard through the contact at County General, that Sophia had cut back her hours at the catering company. Doctor's orders. Too much physical strain. The news should have been reassuring, but Marco just worried about how she'd make up the lost income. 2 months passed. Then, on a Tuesday evening, while Marco was in a meeting with his financial advisors, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Sophia. Can we talk?" Marco excused himself from the meeting immediately, stepping into the hallway to call her back. She answered on the first ring. "Hi," she said, and her voice sounded different, tentative, maybe nervous. "Are you all right? Is the baby—" "We're fine, both fine," she paused. "I'm calling because I've been thinking about what you said, at the diner, about wanting to help without controlling." Marco's heart was pounding in a way that had nothing to do with danger. "Okay. I have a doctor's appointment next week, Thursday at 2, County General." Another pause. "I thought maybe if you wanted you could come. Not as anything specific. Just as someone who should probably know what's happening medically." It was the smallest opening, the tiniest crack in the wall Sophia had built, but it felt monumental. "I'd like that," Marco said, keeping his voice level despite the sudden rush of hope. "Thursday at 2, I'll be there." "Okay, good." Sophia sounded relieved, like she'd been expecting him to push for more. "I'll meet you in the lobby." "Sophia." "Yeah?" "Thank you. For the chance." She was quiet for a moment, then, softly, "Don't make me regret it, Marco." The line went dead, and Marco stood in the hallway of his office building with his phone in his hand, feeling like he'd just won a negotiation more important than any business deal. Sophia had extended an olive branch, had given him exactly what he'd asked for, a chance to be part of this without conditions, without control. Now he just had to prove he could handle it. Thursday came faster than Marco expected. He cleared his afternoon schedule, told Dominic to handle anything that came up, and left his office an hour early to make sure he'd be at County General on time. Vincent drove him in silence, understanding without being told that this was important. The hospital was everything the reports had described: crowded, institutional, the lobby filled with people waiting for various appointments. Marco felt distinctly out of place in his tailored suit, drawing looks from security and nurses who clearly recognized that he didn't belong in this environment. Sophia was sitting near the elevators, wearing jeans and a loose sweater that accommodated her belly. She looked up when Marco approached, and for a moment he saw uncertainty flicker across her face, like she was still deciding whether this was a mistake. "Hi," Marco said, keeping his distance, letting her set the terms. "Hi." Sophia stood slowly, one hand bracing her lower back. "Thanks for coming." "Of course." They rode the elevator to the 3rd floor in silence, Sophia staring at the floor numbers, Marco trying not to stare at her. Up close, he could see more details, the way pregnancy had changed her face slightly, the new fullness to her features. She looked tired but healthy, and Marco felt a fierce surge of protectiveness that he immediately suppressed. That wasn't what she needed from him. The OB/GYN waiting area was packed. Young couples, older women, a few people sitting alone scrolling through their phones. Sophia checked in at the desk, and they found 2 seats together near the window. "It might be a while," Sophia said, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair. "They're always running behind." "That's fine." More silence. Marco had faced down rival family leaders without breaking a sweat. But sitting here next to his pregnant ex-wife, he felt completely out of his depth. "What did you say? What was appropriate?" What would prove he could be trusted without crossing the boundary into control? How's work? Sophia asked, apparently deciding to break the tension. Busy? The waterfront development is moving forward. That's good. And you? Are you still? I'm only working at Bellini's now. Cut the other jobs. Sophia rested her hands on her belly. Doctor's orders, like I said, and before you offer, I'm managing financially. The settlement was generous. I wasn't going to offer. She glanced at him skeptically. Really? Really? You made it clear you want to handle things yourself. I'm trying to respect that. Sophia's expression softened slightly. That must be hard for you. You have no idea. The honesty made her smile just a little. I appreciate you trying. They sat in more comfortable silence after that, watching other patients come and go. Marco noticed Sophia shift in her seat several times, clearly uncomfortable. The chairs were hard plastic, designed for efficiency rather than comfort, and pregnancy had to make them even worse. Sophia Moretti? A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. They both stood. The nurse glanced at Marco, then at Sophia, a question in her eyes. He's with me, Sophia said, and Marco felt something loosen in his chest. The examination room was small, dominated by the ultrasound machine and examination table. The nurse took Sophia's vitals, asked routine questions about symptoms and concerns, then told them Dr. Chen would be in shortly. You can sit, Sophia said, gesturing to the single chair in the corner while she settled on the examination table. Marco sat, feeling large and out of place in the small room. This was Sophia's world now, doctor's appointments and prenatal care and the ordinary machinery of pregnancy. Nothing about it required his skills or his power. He was just a man in a chair, waiting to learn about his child. Dr. Chen arrived with a warm smile and an iPad. She was younger than Marco expected, maybe 40, with an easy competence that immediately put him at ease. Sophia, good to see you, and this must be… Marco, Sophia said, the baby's father. Nice to meet you, Marco. I'm Dr. Chen. She shook his hand, then turned her attention to Sophia. How are you feeling? Any new concerns since last visit? Tired. My back hurts, but otherwise okay. That's all normal for 32 weeks. Let's take a look at how baby's doing. Dr. Chen moved the ultrasound machine into position. This is going to be cold, she warned, squirting gel onto Sophia's exposed belly. Marco watched the screen flicker to life, showing grainy black and white images that gradually resolved into shapes he couldn't quite interpret. But Dr. Chen clearly could, moving the wand with practiced ease, clicking measurements, humming occasionally in a way that sounded satisfied. There's the head, Dr. Chen said, pointing to a rounded shape on the screen. Good size. And here's the spine, nice and straight. Heart looks strong. You can see it beating there. Marco stared at the screen, at the tiny, rapid flutter that was his child's heartbeat. Something shifted in his chest, a feeling so overwhelming he couldn't name it. This was real. Not abstract, not theoretical. A real person, growing and developing, weeks away from entering the world. His son or daughter. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Chen continued. Baby's measuring right on track for 32 weeks. Position is good. We're looking at about 8 more weeks, give or take. Do we… Marco started, then stopped. Sorry. You can ask questions, Dr. Chen said with an encouraging smile. That's what I'm here for. Do we know if it's a boy or girl? Dr. Chen looked at Sophia, who hesitated. I haven't wanted to know, she said quietly. I like the surprise, but if you want it… No, Marco said quickly. If you want to wait, we wait. I was just curious. The we slipped out naturally, and Sophia didn't correct it, just nodded and turned her attention back to the screen where their child, continued its mysterious development. The appointment lasted another 20 minutes. Dr. Chen reviewed nutrition recommendations, discussed what to expect in the final weeks, scheduled the next appointment. Marco listened to all of it, cataloging information, trying to understand this world he'd never been part of. When they finally left, stepping back out into the crowded waiting area, Sophia turned to him. Thank you for coming, and for not… She gestured vaguely. For not being overbearing. I know that's not easy for you. I'm learning… Marco paused, knowing he shouldn't push but unable to help himself. The next appointment, Thursday at 2, 4 weeks from now. You can come if you want." Relief flooded through him. "I want." Sophia studied his face for a long moment. "You really meant it, didn't you? About trying to be different?" "Yes." "Okay." She adjusted her purse on her shoulder. "Then maybe we can figure out what this looks like. Not custody or formal arrangements, just two people who are going to be in each other's lives because of this baby. Parents who can communicate without it being a battle." "I'd like that." They walked toward the elevator together, and for the first time in 8 months, Marco felt like maybe, just maybe, he hadn't lost everything after all. Sophia had opened a door, small and guarded, but open nonetheless. And if he could prove he deserved to walk through it, if he could show her that he could change, could be what she needed instead of what he thought she needed, well, that would be worth more than any empire he'd ever built. The elevator doors closed behind them, and Marco found himself standing close enough to Sophia to smell her shampoo, something floral and simple, nothing like the expensive perfumes he used to buy her. She was staring at the descending floor numbers, one hand resting absently on her belly, and Marco wondered if she could feel the baby moving, wondered what that was like, carrying another life inside you, feeling every kick and shift. "I should get back to work," Sophia said as they stepped into the lobby. "Lunch shift starts in an hour and the buses—" "Let me drive you." She turned to look at him, wariness creeping back into her expression. "Marco, it's not control, it's just practical. I have a car right outside and County General to Bellini's is 20 minutes in traffic. The bus would take you over an hour with transfers." Marco kept his voice level, casual. "Let me give you a ride. Nothing more complicated than that." Sophia hesitated, clearly weighing the offer against her principles. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, just a ride." Vincent was waiting by the car and his eyebrows rose fractionally when he saw Sophia. Marco shot him a look that said not one word, and Vincent simply opened the back door without comment. "Thank you," Sophia said, settling into the leather seat with visible relief. Marco slid in beside her, maintaining a careful distance, and Vincent pulled smoothly into traffic. The silence stretched between them, not quite comfortable but not hostile either. Marco watched the city pass by the windows, his city, the streets he controlled and the businesses he influenced, and the people who answered to him in ways both obvious and subtle. But sitting here next to Sophia, that power felt irrelevant. In this car, in this moment, he was just a man trying to figure out how to be part of his child's life without destroying the fragile trust Sophia was beginning to extend. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said quietly. "Of course." "Why did you really pull the surveillance? The truth, not what you think I want to hear." Marco considered lying, considered softening the truth into something more palatable. But Sophia had always been able to see through his carefully constructed versions of reality, and he'd promised himself he would try to be different. "Because I realized I was doing exactly what you'd accused me of," he said, "controlling instead of protecting, managing instead of trusting. I kept telling myself it was about your safety, but really it was about maintaining some kind of connection, some way of being involved in your life, even after you'd made it clear you didn't want me there." He turned to look at her, "And I realized that if I couldn't respect the boundary you'd drawn, I'd never prove to you that I could change, that I could be what you needed instead of what I thought you needed." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing absent patterns on her belly. "That must have been hard, going against your instincts like that." "You have no idea." "Actually, I think I do." She smiled slightly. "I know what it cost you to step back, to let go of control. That's why I called you, why I asked you to come to the appointment today." "I'm glad you did." "Me too." Sophia shifted in her seat, wincing slightly. "This baby, our baby, deserves to have a father who's present, who's involved. I don't want to raise a child who grows up wondering why their dad wasn't around, or worse, growing up knowing that I deliberately kept them apart." She looked at him directly. "But I also can't have my child growing up thinking that power and control are the same as love, that protecting someone means owning them." "I understand." "Do you?" Sophia's voice was gentle but firm. "Because understanding intellectually and understanding emotionally are two different things, Marco. You can say you get it, but when the baby's here and you see something you think is a threat, every instinct you have is going to tell you to take control, to manage the situation, to eliminate the risk." "I know." Marco had thought about this constantly since seeing Sophia at Bellini's, had played out scenarios in his mind, testing his own reactions, trying to figure out where the line was between protection and control. I can't promise I won't struggle with it. I can't promise I'll get it right every time, but I can promise I'll try, that I'll listen when you tell me I'm crossing a line. Even if you think I'm wrong, even if you think you know better, even then. Vincent pulled up in front of Bellini's and Sophia reached for the door handle. Then she paused, turning back to Marco. There's a childbirth class at the hospital, Wednesdays at 6. It's about preparing for labor, what to expect, how to support someone through delivery. She took a breath. I've been going alone, but the instructor keeps saying it helps to have a partner there, someone who'll be in the room when it happens. Marco's heart jumped. You want me to be in the room? I want the baby to have their father there when they're born. And I want... Sophia's voice softened. I want someone who knows me, who I trust, even if things between us are complicated. I'll be there, Marco said immediately. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. The next class is tomorrow night, 6 o'clock, same building as the OB office, 2nd floor. I'll be there. Sophia nodded, then slid out of the car. She leaned back in before closing the door. And Marco, come in regular clothes, not a suit. The other couples already look at me weird enough without my ex-husband showing up looking like he's going to a board meeting. She was gone before Marco could respond, disappearing into the restaurant with her purse slung over her shoulder. Vincent waited until she was inside before speaking. Boss, are you sure about this? Getting involved? Going to classes? Drive, Marco interrupted. Back to the office. But Vincent's concern lingered in Marco's mind during the ride back. Getting involved was exactly what Sophia had accused him of doing wrong before. The difference, Marco told himself, was that this time she was asking. This time he was being invited into her life rather than forcing his way in. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking a tightrope without a net. One wrong move, one instinctive grab for control, and Sophia would shut him out completely. This time, forever. The next evening, Marco left work early and went home to change. He stood in his closet, staring at rows of expensive suits and custom shirts, and realized he wasn't sure what regular clothes even meant anymore. Everything he owned was tailored, designer, carefully curated to project power and success. Finally, he settled on dark jeans and a plain black sweater, no logos or obvious branding. When he checked his reflection, he barely recognized himself. He looked almost normal. Almost like someone who might belong at a hospital childbirth class. Vincent drove him to County General, and Marco found the 2nd floor classroom with 5 minutes to spare. Through the small window in the door, he could see Sophia already inside, sitting on one of the mats laid out on the floor. She was talking to another pregnant woman, laughing at something, and Marco felt that same strange ache he'd experienced at the diner, the sense that she was genuinely happy in this life she'd built without him. He pushed open the door and Sophia looked up. Her expression went through several shifts, surprise, wariness, then something that might have been relief. She waved him over. You came, she said as he approached. I said I would. I know, but I wasn't sure. She gestured to the mat beside her. Sit. They start in a couple minutes. Marco lowered himself onto the mat, feeling ridiculous and out of place. Around them, other couples were settling in. Young married pairs holding hands, a few older couples who looked like they'd done this before, a woman who appeared to be here with her sister. Everyone looked comfortable, like they belonged. This is Marco, Sophia said to the woman she'd been talking to earlier, the baby's father. Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Jennifer. This is my husband, Tom. Jennifer was enthusiastically friendly, radiating the kind of joy that came from wanted pregnancies and stable relationships. Is this your first? Yes, Marco said. Ours too. We're so excited and nervous, mostly nervous. Jennifer laughed. But that's why we're here, right? To learn what we're doing before we completely mess it up. The instructor arrived before Marco had to respond. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an air of competent authority. She introduced herself as Nancy, explained that she'd been teaching childbirth classes for 20 years and had seen everything, and assured them that whatever fears or concerns they had were completely normal. Tonight we're going to talk about the stages of labor, Nancy said, moving to the whiteboard at the front of the room. Understanding what's happening in your body during birth helps reduce fear and anxiety. And for partners, understanding the process helps you provide better support. The class was nothing like what Marco had expected. Nancy was matter-of-fact about the physical realities of childbirth, explaining contractions and dilation and the various positions that might help with pain management. She had the couples practice breathing techniques, coached the partners on how to apply counterpressure to ease back pain, demonstrated the difference between helpful support and hovering anxiety. "Your job as a partner," Nancy said, making eye contact with each of the non-pregnant people in the room, "is not to fix everything or make all the pain go away. Your job is to be present, to listen, to advocate when needed and step back when asked. Labor is the pregnant person's experience. You're just there to support it." Marco found himself paying attention with the same focus he brought to business negotiations. This was information he needed, skills he had to develop. He watched carefully as Nancy demonstrated massage techniques, noted the signs of different labor stages, memorized the questions partners should ask medical staff. "Okay, let's practice," Nancy said. "Partners, I want you to help your pregnant person get into a comfortable position for relaxation. This might be sitting, lying on their side, whatever feels good. Then we're going to practice breathing through a contraction." Marco turned to Sophia, who was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What position is comfortable?" he asked. "I don't know. Sitting, I guess?" Nancy said lying on your side might be better for your back. Sophia's eyes narrowed slightly. "I'm fine sitting." Marco caught himself, recognized the edge in her voice. He was doing it again, deciding what she needed without asking. "Right, sitting is good. Do you need a pillow or—" "I'm fine, Marco." They sat in tense silence while Nancy walked them through the breathing exercise. Around them, other couples were leaning into each other, the partners providing gentle support while their pregnant companions practiced slow, measured breaths. Marco and Sophia sat stiffly, barely touching, the exercise feeling mechanical and forced. When the class ended an hour later, they gathered their things in silence. Jennifer bounced over, still radiating enthusiasm. "You two should come to dinner with us sometime. It's so nice to meet other couples going through this at the same time." "That's sweet," Sophia said, smiling in a way that didn't quite reach her eyes. "But we're not together. Marco and I are divorced." Jennifer's face fell. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to assume." "It's fine," Marco said. "Easy mistake." They left the classroom together, walking down the hallway in the same uncomfortable silence that had characterized the last half of the class. "That was a disaster," Sophia said finally as they reached the elevator. "It wasn't that bad." "Marco, you spent the entire hour trying to tell me what to do. What position to sit in, how to breathe, when to shift my weight. I was following the instructor's directions. You were controlling the situation." Sophia's voice was sharp now, frustration bleeding through. "Just like you always do? Just like I was afraid you would?" The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. Marco jabbed the button for the lobby harder than necessary. "I was trying to help," he said. "Trying to be a good partner, like Nancy said." "Being a good partner means listening, Marco. Asking what I need instead of deciding for me. Nancy said that too, but you were too busy planning your approach to actually hear it." The words stung because they were true. Marco had been so focused on doing everything right, on proving he could handle this, that he'd fallen back into exactly the patterns Sophia had left him over. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Sophia looked at him, surprised by the immediate apology. "I know you're trying. I do. But trying isn't enough if you don't actually change the behavior." "Then tell me how, because I don't—" Marco ran a hand through his hair, frustration and helplessness warring in his chest. "I don't know how to turn off the instinct to manage everything, to fix problems before they become problems. That's who I've been for so long. I don't know how to be anything else." The elevator reached the lobby, but neither of them moved to exit. Sophia pressed the button to hold the doors closed. "You learn by failing," she said, "by making mistakes and having me tell you when you've crossed a line and then actually adjusting instead of just apologizing and doing the same thing next time." She looked at him directly. "I need to know that you can handle being corrected, Marco. That you won't see it as criticism or attack, but as information you need to do better." "I can handle it." "Can you? Because in our marriage, anytime I tried to tell you something bothered me, you'd apologize and then explain why you'd done it that way. You'd justify instead of just accepting that I was telling you my experience." Marco thought back to their marriage. to the small conflicts that had accumulated over 3 years. Sophia asking him not to vet her friends, him explaining it was for her safety, Sophia wanting to take a trip alone, him listing the reasons it wasn't secure. Every concern she'd raised, he'd countered with logic and justification. He'd never just listened and adjusted. "You're right," he said. I did that. And He paused, searching for honesty instead of excuse. "I didn't even realize I was doing it. I thought I was being reasonable, thought I was having a discussion. But you weren't. You were shutting me down while making it look like conversation." Sophia released the hold button, letting the elevator doors open. "That's what I need to be different this time. If we're going to co-parent, if you're going to be involved in this baby's life, you have to be able to hear when you're wrong and actually change instead of just defending your position." They stepped out into the lobby, and Marco felt the weight of what Sophia was really saying. This wasn't just about childbirth classes or doctor's appointments. This was about whether he was capable of the fundamental shift required to be in her life, in their child's life, without recreating all the dynamics that had driven her away. "The next class is Wednesday," Sophia said. "Same time. If you want to come, I'd like you there. But I need you to actually participate, not perform. Actually listen, not just wait for your turn to demonstrate competence." "I'll do better," Marco said. "I promise." Sophia studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay. Wednesday, then." She started toward the exit, and Marco watched her go, feeling like he'd just barely passed a test he hadn't fully understood. His phone buzzed with messages from Dominic, something about the waterfront deal, a question about resource allocation, the usual business that never stopped demanding attention. But for once, Marco ignored it. He stood in the hospital lobby watching Sophia disappear into the parking lot, and he made himself a promise he would learn this, would figure out how to be present without controlling, how to support without managing, would become the kind of father his child deserved, and the kind of partner, not romantic, but parenting partner, that Sophia needed, even if it meant unlearning everything that had made him successful in his other life, even if it meant being wrong more often than right, even if it meant letting go of control entirely and trusting that Sophia knew what she needed better than he ever could. The following Wednesday, Marco arrived at the class 15 minutes early. He'd spent the intervening days thinking about Sophia's words, about the difference between performing and participating. When she arrived, he simply smiled and gestured to the mat he'd claimed for them, letting her choose where to sit, how to arrange herself. Nancy started the class with a review of breathing techniques, then moved into discussing pain management options during labor. As she talked about epidurals and natural methods and the various choices available, Marco felt Sophia shift beside him. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Back hurts," she murmured. Marco's immediate instinct was to suggest a different position, to offer solutions, to fix the problem. Instead, he asked, "What would help?" Sophia blinked at him, surprised by the question. "I don't know, pressure, maybe, on my lower back?" "Show me where." She guided his hand to the spot, and Marco applied gentle pressure the way Nancy had demonstrated the previous week. Sophia exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Better?" he asked. "Yeah, thanks." They stayed like that through the rest of the class, Marco's hand on Sophia's back, providing support without commentary or instruction. When Nancy had them practice positions for active labor, Marco followed Sophia's lead, moving when she moved, adjusting when she asked, staying quiet when she needed to concentrate. At the end of the class, as they were gathering their things, Sophia said, "That was better." "Good. You listened." "I'm trying to learn." Sophia smiled, a real smile that reminded Marco of early in their relationship when things had been simpler. "I can tell. It's not perfect, but it's better." She paused, shouldering her bag. "Do you want to get coffee? There's a diner a few blocks from here. Nothing fancy, but the coffee's decent." The invitation felt significant, like another small door opening. "I'd like that." They walked to the diner in the cool evening air, Sophia moving slowly, one hand on her lower back. Marco matched her pace without comment, resisting the urge to offer his arm or suggest they drive instead. When they reached the diner, a small place with cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lighting, Sophia slid into a corner booth with visible relief. "Decaf for me," she told the waitress who appeared. "He'll have regular, black." Marco felt something warm settle in his chest at the casual familiarity, the fact that she still remembered how he took his coffee. "So," Sophia said once the waitress had left, "tell me about work. How's the waterfront thing going?" "You really want to know?" "I'm asking, aren't I?" Marco talked about the development project, keeping the details vague but the challenges honest. Sophia listened, asking occasional questions, seeming genuinely interested. It felt strange sitting in a cheap diner discussing business with his ex-wife, who was carrying his child, but also oddly right. Like they were figuring out a new dynamic, something neither romantic nor hostile, but somewhere in between. "What about you?" Marco asked. "How's Bellini's treating you?" "Good. They've been accommodating about the pregnancy, letting me take more breaks, not scheduling me for the late shifts." Sophia wrapped her hands around her coffee mug. "The other servers have been sweet. They threw me a baby shower last week, pooled their tips to buy a car seat and some basics." The mention of the baby shower sent a complicated mix of emotions through Marco. He should have been there, should have been part of that celebration. But he also understood that this was Sophia's world now, her community, and he was just beginning to be invited into it. "That was kind of them," he said carefully. "It was." Sophia took a sip of her coffee. "I've been thinking about after the baby comes." "Okay." "I'm going to need help. Not financial help. I told you, the settlement covers that. But actual help. Someone to hold the baby while I shower. Someone to pick up groceries when I can't leave the apartment. Someone who knows what they're doing when I have no idea what I'm doing." Marco's pulse quickened. "I can do that. Whatever you need." "I know you can. The question is whether you will. Whether you can show up and actually help without trying to take over. Without deciding you know better how my apartment should be organized, or what schedule the baby should be on, or any of the 1,000 other things you'll think you should control." "I won't. Let me finish." Sophia's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not trying to attack you. I'm trying to be realistic about what this is going to take. Newborns are chaos, Marco. Complete, unpredictable chaos. And I need to know that when things are messy and nothing is going according to plan, you're not going to step in and try to impose order. That you can sit in the chaos with me and just be helpful without being controlling." Marco thought about his life, about the carefully structured days and the detailed plans, and the way he managed every variable to minimize uncertainty. The idea of deliberate chaos, of choosing not to impose order, went against every instinct he had. But Sophia wasn't asking him to change who he was in his business life. She was asking him to be different in this one specific context. To be a father who supported rather than directed. A co-parent who collaborated rather than commanded. "I'll try," he said honestly. "I can't promise I'll get it right every time, but I'll try, and I'll listen when you tell me I'm getting it wrong." "That's all I'm asking." The waitress refilled their coffee, and they sat in companionable silence for a while. Outside, the city moved through its evening rhythms. People heading home from work, restaurants filling up for dinner service, the ordinary pulse of life continuing around them. "Can I ask you something?" Marco said finally. "Sure." "When did you know?" "That you were pregnant, I mean. When did you find out?" Sophia's hand moved to her belly, the gesture automatic now. "About 2 weeks after I signed the divorce papers. I was late, took a test, and there it was. 2 pink lines. And you decided right then not to tell me." "Not right then. I thought about it for a while. Went through all the options, all the possibilities." She met his eyes. "I knew you'd want to be involved. Knew you'd insist on providing for us, on making sure we had everything we needed. And I knew that if I let you in then, while everything was still so raw from the divorce, we'd fall right back into the same patterns. You'd take over, I'd resent it, and we'd end up fighting through lawyers instead of actually being parents. So you waited. So I waited. I wanted time to figure out who I was without you, what I wanted for my life, for this baby's life. I wanted to build something that was mine before I tried to figure out if there was room for you in it." The honesty was painful but also clarifying. Sophia hadn't been cruel or vindictive. She'd been strategic, had protected herself and the baby the only way she knew how. "And now?" Marco asked. "Is there room?" "I think so, maybe." Sophia smiled slightly. "You're trying, at least. That's more than I expected." They finished their coffee and Marco drove Sophia home. Not because she couldn't take the bus, but because she accepted his offer when he made it. He pulled up in front of her apartment building, a modest 3-story structure in a neighborhood that was working class but safe. "Thank you," Sophia said, gathering her things. "For tonight. For trying. Same time next Wednesday?" "Same time." She started to get out, then paused. "Marco, I meant what I said about after the baby comes. If you're serious about being involved, about actually helping, I'm going to need that. Not your money or your connections, just you, present and available and willing to change diapers at 3 in the morning." "I'll be there," Marco promised. "Whatever you need, whenever you need it." Sophia nodded, something like trust flickering in her expression. Then she was gone, disappearing into her building, and Marco sat in the car watching her window light up on the second floor. He pulled out his phone, found Dominic's number, and made a call he'd been considering for weeks. "I need you to clear my schedule," Marco said when Dominic answered. "Starting in 6 weeks, I need flexibility, meetings that can be moved, commitments that can be rescheduled." "For how long?" "Indefinitely. The business runs whether I'm in the office every day or not." "Make sure it does." There was a pause. "This is about the baby. This is about being present, about being available when I'm needed instead of when it's convenient." Marco glanced up at Sophia's window. "Can you handle it?" "Yeah, boss, I can handle it." Marco ended the call and sat in the darkness, watching Sophia's silhouette move past her window. Somewhere in that apartment, she was probably making tea, maybe reading, preparing for another shift at Bellini's tomorrow. Living her life on her terms, with the baby she'd chosen to protect by keeping Marco at a distance. But that distance was closing now. Slowly, carefully, with Sophia controlling the pace and Marco learning to follow, instead of lead. It wasn't the relationship he'd imagined having with his child's mother, but it was real and honest and built on something stronger than the control he'd relied on before. It was built on trust, earned one difficult conversation at a time. And for the first time since seeing Sophia in that kitchen at Bellini's, Marco felt like maybe he could do this. Maybe he could be the father his child needed, and the co-parent Sophia deserved. He just had to keep learning, keep listening, keep choosing presence over power, even when every instinct told him otherwise. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm Marco had never experienced before. Not the controlled precision of business meetings or the calculated moves of family negotiations, but something more organic. Messier, real. Every Wednesday at 6, he met Sophia at the hospital for childbirth class. They practiced breathing techniques and labor positions, learned about newborn care and the immediate postpartum period. Nancy walked them through scenarios that ranged from straightforward to complicated, and Marco absorbed every detail with the same intensity he brought to everything. But now he was learning to channel that intensity differently, asking Sophia what she needed instead of assuming, following her lead instead of directing, being present without trying to control the narrative. The other couples in the class had stopped giving them curious looks. Jennifer and Tom had accepted that Marco and Sophia were complicated but figuring it out, and the easy camaraderie of the group helped normalize what felt deeply abnormal to Marco. These were people preparing to become parents, worried about the same things, facing the same unknowns. In this room, Marco wasn't a crime boss or a dangerous man. He was just a father-to-be trying not to mess everything up. On the 4th Wednesday, as the class was wrapping up, Nancy pulled Marco aside. "Can I give you some advice?" she asked, her tone kind but direct. "Of course. I've been teaching these classes for 20 years, and I can always tell which partners are going to handle labor well and which ones are going to fall apart." Nancy glanced over at Sophia, who was chatting with Jennifer near the door. "You're trying very hard, maybe too hard. When labor actually starts, all that careful control you've been practicing is going to get tested in ways you can't prepare for. The key is knowing when to step up and when to step back." "How do I know the difference?" "You watch her, you listen. Sophia will tell you what she needs, but she might not use words. She might just reach for you or pull away or make sounds that mean different things at different stages." Nancy's expression was serious. "Your job isn't to manage her labor. It's to witness it. To be a steady presence while she does the hardest thing her body will ever do. Can you handle that?" Marco thought about all the times in his life when he'd taken action, made decisions, controlled outcomes through sheer force of will. The idea of bearing witness without interfering felt fundamentally foreign. I don't know, he said honestly, but I'm going to try. That's all anyone can do. Nancy patted his arm. Just remember, she's the one doing the work. You're just there to support it. That night, driving Sophia home, Marco mentioned the conversation. Nancy cornered me after class, he said. Told me I need to learn to witness instead of manage. Sophia laughed softly. She's not wrong. She said you'll tell me what you need during labor, even if you're not using words. That's the theory, anyway. Sophia shifted in her seat, one hand on her belly. The baby's been moving a lot today. Feel like they're doing gymnastics in there. Can I? Marco hesitated. Can I feel? Sophia looked at him for a long moment, then reached for his hand and placed it on the side of her belly. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Marco felt it, a firm push against his palm like someone pressing from the inside. He couldn't find words. That's incredible. That's our kid, apparently training for some kind of martial arts competition. Sophia kept his hand there, and Marco felt another movement, then another. Each one sent a jolt of something profound through him. Connection, responsibility, fear and wonder all tangled together. Does it hurt? He asked. Not hurt exactly, just intense, especially when they decide to kick my ribs or push on my bladder. She smiled. But it's also amazing, knowing there's a whole person in there, getting ready to join the world. Marco kept his hand on her belly until the movement stopped, then carefully withdrew. They sat in silence for the rest of the drive, but it felt different than the awkward silences from weeks before. This felt companionable, like they were learning a new language together, one conversation at a time. When he pulled up to Sophia's building, she didn't immediately get out. I have another doctor's appointment next Thursday, she said. 2 o'clock, same as before. You're still welcome to come if you want. I want. And I was thinking, Sophia paused, seeming to gather courage. Maybe after, you could come up. See the apartment, see where the baby's gonna live, meet my neighbor who's offered to help sometimes, just so you know the setup. The invitation felt monumental. Sophia had carefully maintained boundaries around her space, her life outside of their scheduled meetings. Asking him into her apartment was crossing a threshold. I'd like that, Marco said quietly. Thank you for trusting me with it. I'm trying, Sophia said. To trust that you'll respect the boundaries even when you're inside them. I will, I promise. She nodded and climbed out of the car, and Marco watched her disappear into her building before pulling away. He had work waiting. Always work. Messages from Dominic about complications with the waterfront deal, questions about resource allocation, the never-ending demands of running an organization. But his mind stayed fixed on that moment of feeling his child move, on the trust implicit in Sophia's invitation, on Nancy's words about witnessing instead of managing. The week passed in its usual blur of meetings and negotiations. Marco handled business with his characteristic efficiency, but part of his attention was always elsewhere, planning for the appointment with Sophia, thinking about seeing her apartment, wondering what it would be like to stand in the space where his child would take their first steps, speak their first words, grow into whoever they would become. Thursday arrived cold and clear. Marco left the office early, changed into the jeans and sweater that had become his uniform for anything involving Sophia, and met her in the lobby of County General at 5 minutes before 2. Hi, she said, smiling when she saw him. Her belly seemed bigger every time they met, impossible as that seemed. She was wearing a loose blue dress that accommodated her pregnancy, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Hi, how are you feeling? Tired, uncomfortable, ready for this baby to be out of me. Sophia laughed. But otherwise good. The appointment followed the familiar routine, vitals, measurements, questions about symptoms. Doctor. Chen performed another ultrasound, pointing out how the baby had shifted position, now head down and ready for birth. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Chen said. We're at 36 weeks now, which means baby could come any time in the next month. Make sure you have your hospital bag packed, your birth plan sorted, and someone available to get you to the hospital when labor starts. I'm available, Marco said immediately. Anytime, day or night. Dr. Chen looked at Sophia, who nodded. He's my ride when it happens. Good, then we're all set. Dr. Chen made some notes on her tablet. Any questions? How will I know? Sophia asked. When it's real labor versus false labor? Contractions that get closer together, more intense, don't stop when you change position or rest. Water breaking is another definite sign, though that doesn't always happen first. When you're having contractions 5 minutes apart for an hour, that's when you head to the hospital. Doctor. Chen smiled reassuringly. You'll know. Trust me, when it's real, you'll know. After the appointment, they walked to the parking garage together. Sophia moved slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back, and Marco matched her pace without comment. My place is about 20 minutes from here, Sophia said as they reached the car. Brookside Apartments, you know where that is? I know it. Marco had known exactly where Sophia lived for months, though he'd never driven there, never violated that boundary even when the surveillance had been active. The neighborhood was working class but well-maintained, tree-lined streets and older buildings with character. Sophia's apartment complex was a 3-story brick structure with a small courtyard in front. Marco parked in a visitor spot and followed Sophia inside. The building smelled like cooking, an old carpet, sounds of life filtering through doors, a television playing, a baby crying somewhere on the upper floors, someone practicing piano. Sophia's apartment was on the second floor, number 2B, and she fumbled with her keys for a moment before getting the door open. It's not much, she said, stepping inside, but it's mine. The apartment was small but carefully arranged, a combined living room and kitchen, a short hallway that presumably led to a bedroom and bathroom. The furniture was modest, some pieces Marco recognized from before their marriage, things Sophia had kept in storage during their time together. But the space felt warm, lived in, filled with small touches that were purely Sophia. Books stacked on the coffee table, plants on the windowsill, a quilt her grandmother had made draped over the back of the couch. And in the corner of the living room, a crib, still in its box, leaning against the wall. I bought it 2 weeks ago, Sophia said, following his gaze, but I can't figure out how to put it together. The instructions might as well be in another language. Marco moved to the box, examining the packaging. I could help with that, if you want. Would you? Of course. Sophia settled onto the couch with visible relief while Marco opened the box and started laying out pieces. The instructions were unnecessarily complicated, typical of mass-produced furniture, but Marco had always been good at spatial reasoning. He sorted screws and identified components, working methodically through the assembly. There's a woman across the hall, Sophia said, watching him work. Mrs. Chen. Different Chen, no relation to my doctor. She's offered to help sometimes, said she raised 4 kids and knows what it's like. She seems sweet. That's good, having support nearby. Yeah, and the building manager knows I'm pregnant, said he'd make sure any maintenance issues get handled quickly. Everyone's been really kind. Sophia paused. It's strange being part of a community like this. During our marriage, we were so isolated. It was always just us, or us and your business associates. I forgot what it was like to have neighbors who actually know your name. Marco tightened a bolt, considering his words carefully. I didn't realize that bothered you, the isolation. I didn't fully realize it either until after I left. Then suddenly I was talking to people at the grocery store, chatting with other waitresses between shifts, making small talk with strangers. And I realized how much I'd missed that, how much your world had cut me off from ordinary human connection. The observation stung, but Marco couldn't deny its truth. His world was built on careful separation. Who you trusted, who you kept at arm's length, who you never let close enough to become a threat. He'd applied those same principles to his marriage without realizing he was suffocating Sophia in the process. I'm sorry, he said quietly, fitting another piece of the crib into place. I never wanted you to feel isolated. I know. That's the hard part, knowing you never meant to hurt me, but being hurt anyway. They fell into silence while Marco continued assembling the crib. It was peaceful work, methodical and clear, each piece fitting together in a predetermined way. Not like the messy complexity of relationships, where the right answer wasn't always obvious and good intentions didn't guarantee good outcomes. A knock on the door interrupted the quiet. Sophia started to get up, but Marco waved her back. I'll get it. He opened the door to find an elderly Asian woman holding a casserole dish, her expression friendly until she saw Marco. Then her eyes narrowed with sharp assessment. You must be the father, she said, her accent slight. Sophia mentioned you might start coming around. Marco DeLuca. He extended his hand. You must be Mrs. Chen. I am. She shook his hand with surprising firmness, still studying him with those sharp eyes. Sophia is a good girl. Works hard, never complains, always polite. She deserves better than a man who walks away. I didn't walk away. We divorced. Same thing. Mrs. Chen pushed past him into the apartment, carrying her casserole dish straight to Sophia. I made you chicken and rice. Easy to heat up, good nutrition for the baby. You eat too much restaurant food. Mrs. Chen, you didn't have to. Of course I did. What are neighbors for? Mrs. Chen set the dish on the kitchen counter, then turned back to Marco. You're building the crib? Yes, ma'am. Good. About time someone helped her with that. She's been staring at that box for 2 weeks. Mrs. Chen moved to inspect his work, nodding approvingly. You're doing it right. My husband, he would have had pieces left over, the whole thing falling apart. Men always think they don't need instructions. I'm following them carefully, Marco assured her. Smart man. Maybe there's hope for you yet. Mrs. Chen patted Sophia's hand. I'm going back to my shows. You call me if you need anything, yes? Day or night. I don't sleep much anyway. She left as abruptly as she'd arrived, and Sophia laughed at Marco's expression. She's protective, Sophia explained. Decided I needed looking after about 5 minutes after I moved in. She seems formidable. She is, but she's also kind. Brought me soup when I had morning sickness so bad I couldn't keep anything down. Walked with me to the bus stop on mornings when it was still dark out. She reminds me of my grandmother. Marco returned to the crib, thinking about Mrs. Chen's assessment. She deserved better than a man who walks away. The old Marco would have bristled at the judgment, would have explained the circumstances, defended his position. But the Marco who was learning to listen, to witness instead of manage, just absorbed the words and acknowledged their truth. Sophia did deserve better. The question was whether he could become better. 30 minutes later, the crib was fully assembled. Marco positioned it carefully in the corner Sophia indicated, making sure it was stable and secure. Thank you, Sophia said, running her hand along the railing. It makes it feel real, seeing it put together, like there's actually going to be a baby sleeping in it soon. 4 weeks or less, according to Dr. Chen. 4 weeks or less. Sophia's hand moved to her belly. I'm terrified, Marco. What if I'm terrible at this? What if I can't figure out what the baby needs, or I drop them, or make some catastrophic mistake? You won't. How do you know? Because you're already putting them first, already making choices to protect them, give them the best life you can provide. That's what good parents do. Marco moved to sit on the couch, maintaining careful distance. And you won't be alone. You'll have Mrs. Chen and your coworkers and the childbirth class people, and if you want, me. Sophia sat down beside him, closer than she had in months. I do want that. Want you involved. I'm just scared of what it might cost. What do you mean? I'm scared that once the baby's here, you'll slip back into old patterns, that you'll see something you think is a threat and decide you need to take control, that your world will seep in even though I've tried so hard to keep it out. She looked at him directly. I'm scared that I'll let you in and you'll prove me right about why I left. The honesty was painful but necessary. Marco understood what Sophia was really saying, that this fragile trust they'd been building could shatter the moment he reverted to type, that every choice he made from here forward would either strengthen or destroy the relationship they were trying to create for their child's sake. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, he said. Can't promise I won't struggle with my instincts or occasionally get it wrong, but I can promise I'll keep trying, keep listening when you tell me I'm crossing a line, keep choosing to be present instead of powerful. That's a hard promise to keep. I know, but you're worth it. The baby's worth it. Marco paused. And maybe I'm finally starting to understand that the thing I was trying to protect during our marriage, you, us, the life we were building, I was actually destroying by holding on too tight. Sophia was quiet for a long time, her hand absently rubbing circles on her belly. Outside, the sounds of the building continued. Footsteps in the hallway, muffled conversations, the ordinary noise of people living their lives. Stay for dinner, Sophia said finally. Mrs. Chen made enough chicken and rice for an army, and I hate eating alone. The invitation was simple but significant. Another boundary crossed, another step toward whatever this new relationship between them was becoming. I'd like that, Marco said. They ate at Sophia's small kitchen table, the casserole dish between them, talking about inconsequential things. Sophia told him about the regulars at Bellini's, the strange requests people made, the surprising kindness of strangers. Marco found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did, just listening without planning his next move, being present without agenda. After dinner, Marco helped clean up, washing dishes while Sophia dried, the domesticity of it strange and comfortable at once. When everything was put away, Sophia walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said, "for the crib, for dinner, for just being here without it feeling like an invasion. Thank you for letting me in." Sophia reached out and squeezed his hand briefly. "Next Wednesday, childbirth class. I'll be there." Marco drove home through the darkening city, his mind full of images from the afternoon. Sophia's small apartment with its careful touches, Mrs. Chen's protective assessment, the assembled crib waiting for its tiny occupant, the easy rhythm of dinner and conversation, like they were building something new from the ruins of what they'd been before. When he reached his penthouse, all expensive furniture and strategic lighting and carefully curated art, it felt sterile by comparison. This was the home of a man who controlled everything, who kept life at a careful distance. Sophia's apartment, with its second-hand furniture and neighbors who brought casserole, felt more alive than anything in Marco's world. His phone rang, Dominic's name on the screen. "We've got a problem," Dominic said without preamble. "The Russos are getting cold feet about the waterfront timeline. Anthony's asking for a meeting tomorrow to renegotiate terms." Marco's instinct was to say yes immediately, to handle the problem, to reassert control over a situation that was slipping. But then he thought about Nancy's words, knowing when to step back, about Sophia's fear that his world would seep in, about the choice he'd made to prioritize being present. "Tell Anthony we meet next week," Marco said. "I'm not available tomorrow." "Boss, if we wait a week, they might walk entirely." Then they walk. The deal isn't worth anything if we're constantly bending to their timeline. Marco kept his voice level. "Tell Anthony we meet next week. We renegotiate like adults. And if he's not interested, we find other partners." Dominic was silent for a moment. "You're serious? Completely? All right, I'll make it happen." Another pause. "This is about the baby, isn't it? About being available when Sophia goes into labor. This is about understanding that some things are more important than business deals, even lucrative ones." "Never thought I'd hear you say that." "Neither did I," Marco admitted. "But here we are." After hanging up, Marco stood at his windows looking out over the city. Somewhere out there, Sophia was probably settling in for the night, maybe reading or watching television, one hand on her belly, feeling their child move. In 4 weeks or less, that child would be born, and Marco's entire world would change in ways he couldn't predict or control. The old Marco would have tried anyway, would have planned every contingency, prepared for every outcome, built structures to manage the chaos of new parenthood. But the Marco who was learning to be a father understood that some things couldn't be managed, could only be experienced, witnessed, supported. The baby would come when they were ready, not according to any schedule Marco might prefer. Labor would unfold the way it needed to, regardless of his plans. And parenthood would be messy and chaotic and completely beyond his ability to control. His job was to show up anyway, to be present in the mess, to support Sophia without trying to direct her, to help raise their child without trying to own the process, to prove, one small choice at a time, that he could be what they needed instead of what he thought they needed. The weeks continued their rhythm. Childbirth classes on Wednesdays, doctor's appointments every Thursday, now that Sophia had entered her final month. Marco cleared his schedule of anything that couldn't be rescheduled, made sure Dominic and his other lieutenants understood that he needed flexibility. The organization didn't collapse without his constant attention. Business continued, and Marco discovered that stepping back from total control didn't mean everything fell apart. It just meant trusting other people to handle things competently. On a Wednesday night after class, as Marco was driving Sophia home, she gasped suddenly. "You okay?" Marco asked, immediately alert. "Yeah, just strong kick." Sophia pressed her hand to her side. "This kid is running out of room in there. Dr. Chen said any day now." "I know, I'm ready, so ready." Sophia shifted in her seat, trying to get comfortable. "I can't sleep more than an hour at a time. My back constantly hurts, and I have to pee approximately every 15 minutes. Pregnancy is magical and beautiful, and I never want to do it again." Marco smiled. "You say that now." "I say that with complete conviction." But Sophia was smiling too, though I guess we'll see how I feel once I meet this little person. When they reached her building, Marco walked her to her door, a routine they'd developed over recent weeks. Sophia unlocked her apartment, then turned back to him. "Do you have a bag packed?" she asked. "For the hospital?" "What would I need to pack?" "Change of clothes, toiletries, phone charger, snacks. Nancy said partners should have supplies too, since we might be there for a while." Sophia leaned against her doorframe. "Labor could start any time. Could be tomorrow, could be 3 weeks from now. But when it happens, I'm going to call you, and you're going to need to be ready." "I'll pack tonight," Marco promised. "And Marco?" Sophia's expression was serious. "When I call, and I will call, I need you to come, not to send Vincent or arrange for someone else to drive me. I need you there. I'll be there, no matter what, no matter when." "Okay." Sophia nodded, something like relief crossing her face. "Okay. Good night, Marco." "Good night, Sophia." Marco drove home and immediately packed a bag, clothes, basic toiletries, his phone charger, and after a moment's thought, the small velvet box containing Sophia's wedding ring that he'd kept in his desk drawer. Not because he thought she'd want it back, but because it felt like something he should have with him. A reminder of what they'd been and what they were trying to build from those ruins. He placed the packed bag by his front door where he'd see it every time he left, a tangible reminder that his life could change at any moment. That somewhere in the city, Sophia was carrying their child who would arrive on their own schedule, demanding Marco's presence and attention, and commitment in ways that had nothing to do with power or control. 3 days later, at 2:15 in the morning, Marco's phone rang. He answered before the second ring, instantly awake. "Sophia, it's time." Her voice was tight, controlled but strained. "My water broke about 20 minutes ago. Contractions are getting closer together." Marco was already moving, grabbing clothes, the packed bag, his keys. "I'm on my way, 15 minutes. "Okay, I'm timing them. They're about 6 minutes apart now." "Stay on the phone with me," Marco said, pulling on jeans one-handed while keeping the phone pressed to his ear. "Tell me what you're feeling." He listened to Sophia breathe through a contraction while he dressed, her controlled breathing technique from class barely masking the pain underneath. When it passed, she said, "That was a strong one. Definitely stronger than the ones earlier. I'm getting in the car now, 12 minutes away." Marco grabbed his bag and headed for the elevator, phone still pressed to his ear. "Do you have your hospital bag?" "By the door, and Mrs. Chen heard me moving around, came over to check. She's here with me." "Put her on speaker." A rustling sound, then Mrs. Chen's voice came through. "Mr. DeLuca." "Mrs. Chen, thank you for being there. I'm 10 minutes out. Can you help her down to the lobby?" "Of course. We'll go slow." Marco drove through empty streets faster than was wise, listening to Sophia breathe through another contraction. Each one seemed closer than the last, more intense. By the time he pulled up to her building, they were coming every 4 minutes. Sophia was waiting in the lobby with Mrs. Chen, her face pale but determined. She had one hand pressed to her belly, the other gripping her hospital bag. When she saw Marco, some of the tension left her face. "You came," she said, as if there had been any doubt. "I told you I would." Marco took her bag, then offered his arm. "Let's get you to the hospital." The drive to County General felt both endless and too quick. Sophia breathed through contractions while Marco navigated traffic, trying to balance speed with smoothness. Every time she gasped or gripped the door handle, his heart seized, but he kept his voice calm, kept talking to her, kept being the steady presence Nancy had said she would need. At the hospital, a wheelchair was waiting. Sophia was admitted quickly, whisked up to the labor and delivery floor, settled into a room with monitors and medical equipment that all seemed designed to emphasize how little control Marco had over what was about to happen. "I'm going to check your progress," the nurse said, a kind-faced woman named Patricia, who moved with efficient competence. After a quick examination, she nodded. "You're at 5 centimeters, moving right along. Dr. Chen is on her way." 5 centimeters meant halfway there, Marco remembered from class. Halfway through labor. The hours that followed tested every lesson Marco had learned about letting go of control. Sophia's labor progressed in waves. periods of intense contractions where she gripped his hand hard enough to hurt, followed by brief respites where she tried to rest between the pain. Marco stayed by her side through all of it, doing exactly what Nancy had taught him. He didn't try to fix anything or manage the process. He just witnessed it, supported it, was present in the way Sophia needed. "I can't do this," Sophia gasped during a particularly brutal contraction around 6 in the morning. "It's too much. I can't." "You are doing it," Marco said quietly, his hand steady in hers. "You're doing it right now. Just breathe through this one. Just this one." Sophia made a sound that was half sob, half groan, her entire body tense with effort. Marco wanted desperately to do something, fix something, make the pain stop. But all he could do was be there, his presence the only thing he had to offer. When the contraction finally eased, Sophia slumped back against the pillows, exhausted. "How much longer?" "Dr. Chen said you're at 8 centimeters, Marco reminded her. "Almost there." "Almost isn't enough. I want this over. I want—" Another contraction hit, cutting off her words. Marco had faced dangerous situations in his life, moments where violence seemed inevitable and survival required decisive action. But nothing had prepared him for this, for being completely helpless while someone he cared about suffered, for having no tool or skill that could make it better. All he could do was stay. Be the steady presence Nancy had described. Trust that Sophia's body knew what to do even when the process seemed impossible. Dr. Chen arrived around 7, still looking calm and competent despite the early hour. She checked Sophia's progress and nodded with satisfaction. 9 centimeters. You're almost ready to push. Thank God, Sophia breathed. Then another contraction seized her, and she gripped Marco's hand like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. The next hour was brutal. The contractions came faster, harder, giving Sophia barely any time to recover between them. Marco stayed at her side, feeding her ice chips when she asked, wiping her face with a cool cloth, murmuring encouragement that felt inadequate but was all he had to give. "Okay, Sophia, doctor," Chen said finally, positioning herself at the foot of the bed. "You're fully dilated. Next contraction, I want you to push." Fear flickered across Sophia's face. "I don't think I can—" "You can," Marco said firmly. "You've done everything else. You can do this too." Sophia looked at him, and something passed between them, a moment of connection that transcended everything complicated about their history. In this room, in this moment, they were just two people bringing a child into the world together. "Okay," Sophia whispered. "Okay." The next contraction hit, and Sophia pushed. Marco had seen her be strong before, walking away from their marriage, building a new life, choosing struggle over his control. But this was different. This was primal strength, her entire body working toward a single purpose with intensity that was almost frightening. "Good," Dr. Chen encouraged. "That's perfect. Rest now, then we'll do it again." They fell into a rhythm. Contraction, push, brief rest, repeat. Marco lost track of time, lost track of everything except Sophia's face contorted with effort and the steady stream of encouragement from Dr. Chen and the nurse. He'd never felt more useless or more necessary, standing there holding Sophia's hand while she did the impossible work of bringing their child into the world. "I can see the head, doctor," Chen said, excitement creeping into her professional calm. "1 or 2 more pushes, Sophia. You're almost there." "I can't." "You can," Marco said again. "1 more. Just 1 more." Sophia gathered herself, every ounce of strength she had left, and pushed. The sound she made was raw and primal, beyond words, beyond anything Marco had ever heard. And then, a baby's cry split the air. "It's a boy," Dr. Chen announced, lifting a squirming, crying infant into view. "You have a son." Marco stared at the tiny human in Dr. Chen's hands, impossibly small, covered in vernix and blood, screaming his arrival into the world with impressive volume. This was his son. His child, the abstract concept he'd been preparing for, suddenly concrete and real and more overwhelming than anything he'd ever experienced. "Would you like to cut the cord?" Dr. Chen asked, and Marco nodded numbly, following her instructions with hands that shook slightly. Then the baby was being placed on Sophia's chest, skin to skin, and she was crying and laughing at the same time, her hands coming up to cradle this tiny person they'd made together. Hi, Sophia whispered, her voice broken with emotion. Hi, baby. We've been waiting for you. The baby's cries quieted at the sound of her voice, his tiny face scrunching up as he tried to focus on this new world. Marco stood frozen, watching Sophia with their son, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was what mattered, not power or control or carefully managed outcomes. This messy, chaotic, completely uncontrollable moment of new life entering the world. Do you want to hold him? Sophia asked, looking up at Marco with tears streaming down her face. Yes, if that's okay. The nurse helped transfer the baby into Marco's arms, showing him how to support the head, how to hold this impossibly fragile human. Marco looked down at his son, at perfect tiny fingers and a nose that might become his and eyes that were trying to open and see, and felt tears he hadn't known he was capable of sliding down his face. Hi, he said softly, his voice rough. I'm your dad. I'm going to try really hard not to mess this up. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, and Marco felt his heart crack open in a way it never had before. This was love, he realized. Not the controlled affection he'd felt for Sophia during their marriage. Not the careful loyalty he extended to his organization. This was something bigger and more terrifying, unconditional, overwhelming, completely beyond his ability to manage or direct. He's perfect, Marco said, looking at Sophia. You did this. You're amazing. Sophia smiled through her exhaustion. We did this. Together. The next hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and paperwork and the strange, surreal reality of being parents. The baby, they hadn't discussed names, Marco realized, hadn't prepared for this basic fact, nursed for the first time with fumbling desperation. Sophia was moved to a recovery room. Marco called Mrs. Chen to let her know mother and baby were both healthy, then sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair watching Sophia sleep while their son dozed in the bassinet beside her bed. At some point, Sophia woke and found Marco still sitting there. You don't have to stay, she said quietly. I know you have work, things to handle. Nothing is more important than this, Marco said, than being here with you and him. We need to talk about names, Sophia said, glancing at the bassinet. We can't just keep calling him the baby. What do you like? Sophia considered. I always liked the name Daniel. Danny for short. It was my grandfather's name. Daniel. Marco tested the sound. Daniel DeLuca. Actually, Sophia hesitated. I was thinking Daniel Moretti, my last name. The words shouldn't have stung, but they did. Marco understood the reasoning. Sophia wanted her son to be separate from the DeLuca world, protected by distance and a different name. But it still felt like being shut out, reminded that no matter how much he'd changed, some boundaries would remain. Okay, Marco said, keeping his voice level. Daniel Moretti. Unless, Sophia bit her lip, unless you really want him to have your name. We could hyphenate. Moretti DeLuca. Marco thought about what that would mean. His son carrying the DeLuca name, even partially, would connect the child to everything Marco had spent years building, would make him visible to rivals, to federal investigators, to everyone who saw the name DeLuca and understood what it represented. No, Marco said finally. Daniel Moretti is good, better, safer. Relief crossed Sophia's face. Thank you for understanding. I'm trying to. A soft sound from the bassinet drew their attention. Daniel was waking up, his tiny face scrunching as he prepared to cry. Sophia started to get up, wincing at the movement, and Marco held out a hand. Let me. You should rest. He lifted Daniel carefully, supporting the small head the way the nurse had shown him. The baby was so light, so impossibly fragile. Marco had held weapons that weighed more, made decisions that affected hundreds of lives. But nothing had ever felt as important as holding this tiny human safely. Hey, little man, Marco said softly, settling back into the chair with Daniel cradled against his chest. Your mom did all the hard work. Now she needs to sleep, okay? So you and I are going to hang out quietly. Daniel made a small snuffling sound but didn't cry. His eyes were open now, unfocused but trying to see. And Marco found himself talking to his son in a low voice about nothing and everything. about the city outside the window, about the family waiting to meet him, about how much his mother loved him, how hard she'd worked to keep him safe even before he was born. "I'm going to keep you safe too," Marco promised. "But different than I did before. I'm going to keep you safe by giving you freedom to make your own choices, by listening instead of controlling, by being present instead of powerful." He paused, looking at this tiny face that held so much potential. "Your mom taught me that. She's the strongest person I know, and you're lucky to have her." "Are you always this sentimental at 4 in the afternoon?" Sophia asked from the bed, her voice sleepy but amused. Marco looked up to find her watching them. "I didn't realize you were awake. Just woke up. You're good with him." "I'm terrified I'm going to break him." "That's how everyone feels at first." Sophia shifted carefully, making room. "Bring him here? I should try feeding him again." Marco transferred Daniel to Sophia, watching as she positioned him for nursing. It was strange and intimate and completely ordinary. Just a mother feeding her child, but it felt profound in a way Marco couldn't articulate. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now we figure it out," Sophia said, focused on Daniel. "Day by day. No grand plans, no detailed strategies, just two people learning how to be parents to this little person." "I can work with that." "Can you?" Sophia looked at him directly. "Can you really handle not having a plan? Not knowing what comes next?" Marco thought about everything that had led to this moment. The divorce that had shattered him, Sophia's pregnancy that she'd hidden, the slow, painful process of learning to let go of control. Standing here now, watching his son nurse, Marco realized that none of his planning would have prepared him for this anyway. Parenthood wasn't something you strategized. It was something you lived through, one moment at a time. "I can try," he said. "That's all I've got. But I'll keep trying." A soft knock on the door interrupted them. Dr. Chen poked her head in, smiling. "Just checking on my favorite new family. How are we feeling?" "Sore. Exhausted. Happy," Sophia said. "All completely normal." Dr. Chen moved to check her vitals, examined Daniel briefly. "Everything looks perfect. You two did beautifully. I'll have the nurse bring in the discharge paperwork. You can go home tomorrow morning if you're feeling up to it." After Dr. Chen left, Sophia looked at Marco with uncertainty. "Tomorrow is fast. I don't know if I'm ready to handle him alone." "You won't be alone," Marco said immediately, then caught himself. "Sorry. I mean, if you want help, I can be there. Whatever you need." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, Daniel making soft suckling sounds against her. "I do want help. Want you there. If you're serious about being present." "I'm serious. Then come home with us tomorrow. Not to stay. I'm not ready for that. But to help me figure out the first few days, make sure I don't completely fall apart." The invitation was everything Marco had wanted and been afraid to ask for. A chance to be part of these crucial early days, to help Sophia when she needed it, to be present in his son's life from the very beginning. "I'd like that," he said. "Thank you." They spent the rest of the afternoon in comfortable quiet, taking turns holding Daniel when he wasn't nursing, dozing when exhaustion caught up to them. Marco called Dominic to let him know everything could wait, that he was unavailable for the next week at minimum. Dominic didn't ask questions, just said he'd handle whatever came up. Mrs. Chen visited that evening, bringing flowers and cooing over Daniel with the authority of someone who'd seen countless babies. She pulled Marco aside at one point. "You did good," she said simply. "Being here, not running away." "I'm trying to be better than I was." "Good. Keep trying." Mrs. Chen patted his arm. "That boy needs his father. A real father who shows up, not just someone who sends money and thinks that's enough." "I'll show up," Marco promised. The next morning, they packed up Sophia's things and prepared to leave. A nurse went through discharge instructions while Marco listened carefully, cataloging information about feeding schedules and warning signs and when to call the doctor. He buckled Daniel into the car seat, a task that took 3 attempts and assistance from the nurse, and helped Sophia into the wheelchair hospital policy required. The drive to Sophia's apartment was careful and slow, Marco hyper-aware of his precious cargo in the back seat. Every bump felt dangerous. Every other driver seemed reckless. By the time they pulled up to her building, his shoulders were tight with tension. "He's fine," Sophia said, reading his expression. Babies are tougher than they look. He's so small. I know, but he's going to be fine. We're all going to be fine. Getting Sophia and Daniel upstairs was a production involving the car seat, the hospital bag, and several trips. Mrs. Chen appeared as if summoned, taking charge of organizing while Sophia settled on the couch with Daniel. "I made soup," Mrs. Chen announced. "In your refrigerator. Also casseroles. You just heat and eat. No arguing." "Thank you," Sophia said, tears gathering in her eyes, "for everything." "What are neighbors for?" Mrs. Chen smiled at Daniel. "Beautiful baby. He has his father's nose." After Mrs. Chen left, Marco stood awkwardly in Sophia's small apartment, suddenly unsure of his role now that they were home. The hospital had clear parameters: visiting hours, medical staff, defined spaces. But here in Sophia's home, the boundaries were less obvious. "You can sit," Sophia said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "You look like you're about to run away." "I don't want to intrude." "You're not intruding. I asked you to be here, remember?" Sophia adjusted Daniel, who was starting to fuss. "Though I might need help. I don't think I can get up yet without serious pain, and I need to change his diaper." Marco moved immediately, grateful for a concrete task. He'd watched the nurses at the hospital, paid attention to the demonstration of diaper changing, but doing it himself was different. Daniel squirmed and cried, making everything harder, but Marco managed it eventually. "See? Natural," Sophia said with a tired smile. "That took me 5 minutes, and he screamed the whole time." "He's fed and dry now. That's what matters." The afternoon settled into a rhythm of feeding, changing, and trying to get Daniel to sleep. Marco made Sophia lunch from Mrs. Chen's soup, helped her move from couch to bed when she needed to rest, held Daniel so she could shower. It was mundane and exhausting, and nothing like the life Marco was used to, but it felt more important than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. That night, when Daniel woke crying at 2 in the morning, Marco was already getting up from the chair where he'd dozed off. "I've got him," he said quietly, lifting Daniel from the bassinet they'd set up in Sophia's bedroom. "You rest." He walked Daniel around the small apartment, bouncing gently the way the childbirth class had taught, murmuring soft reassurances. Eventually, Daniel quieted, his tiny body relaxing against Marco's chest. Marco stood at the window looking out at the sleeping city, his city, the empire he'd built, and realized that none of it mattered as much as this, as being here in this moment with his son. "Your mom was right," he whispered to Daniel. "Power isn't the same as protection. Control isn't the same as love. I'm still learning that, but I'm going to keep trying. For you, for her, for whoever we become as a family." Daniel made a small sound, already drifting back to sleep, and Marco carefully placed him back in the bassinet. When he turned around, Sophia was watching from the bed. "You're good at this," she said softly. "I'm terrified at this." "Same thing with babies." Sophia shifted, making room. "Come here, sit." Marco sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jostle her. Sophia reached for his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for being here, for actually helping instead of trying to take over. I know it's not easy for you." "It's worth it. You're both worth it." Sophia was quiet for a moment, her thumb tracing circles on his palm. "I've been thinking about what comes next, after this week." Marco's chest tightened. "Okay. I don't want you to disappear. Don't want Daniel growing up only seeing you at scheduled visits or planned events. I want—" She paused, searching for words. "I want him to know his father, really know you, which means you being part of the ordinary days, not just the special occasions." "What does that look like?" "I don't know exactly. We'll figure it out as we go. But maybe you could come over a few times a week. Help with bath time or bedtime. Be present in the small moments." Sophia looked at him directly. "I'm not asking you to move in. I'm not saying we're getting back together. I'm just saying that co-parenting works better when both parents are actually present." "I want that," Marco said immediately. "Whatever schedule works for you, whatever boundaries you need, I'll be there. Even when it's messy? Even when I'm exhausted and snapping at you and everything is chaos? Especially then." Sophia smiled, tired but genuine. "Okay, then we'll try." They sat in the darkness, listening to Daniel's soft breathing, and Marco felt something settle inside him. This wasn't the life he'd planned, wasn't the neat, controlled outcome he'd once thought he wanted, but it was real and messy and more valuable than anything his power had ever given him. The week passed in a blur of diapers and feeding and learning Daniel's different cries. Marco showed up every morning and stayed until evening, helping Sophia navigate the chaos of new parenthood. They developed routines. Marco handled morning diaper changes while Sophia prepared for the first feeding. He did dishes and laundry and runs to the pharmacy for supplies they'd forgotten. He held Daniel so Sophia could nap, walked him around the apartment when he was fussy, learned the specific bounce and sway that seemed to calm him. And slowly, in the midst of the chaos, something shifted between Marco and Sophia. Not romance. They were both too exhausted for that, too focused on Daniel to think about their own relationship. But partnership. Real partnership built on shared responsibility and mutual support instead of power dynamics and control. On the 7th day, as Marco was getting ready to leave for the night, Sophia stopped him. "I know we said you'd go home after this week," she said, "but if you wanted to stay tonight, on the couch, not, just so you're here for the overnight feedings, it would help." The invitation was careful, boundaried, exactly what Marco had been learning to respect. "I'd like that, if you're sure." "I'm sure." Marco stayed, and then he stayed the next night, and the next. Not because he was taking over or imposing, but because Sophia kept asking and he kept showing up. They fell into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Marco sleeping on the couch, helping with night feedings, being present without claiming space that wasn't his. 3 weeks after Daniel's birth, Marco was changing a diaper at 2 in the morning when Sophia appeared in the doorway. "I've been thinking," she said, leaning against the frame, "about names." "Okay." "Daniel Moretti feels right for now, keeps him separate from your world, gives him a fresh start." She paused.
Bum.
"But maybe when he's older, when he can make his own choices, we tell him about the DeLuca name too. Let him decide if he wants that connection." Marco looked up from fastening Daniel's onesie. "You'd be okay with that?" "I think—" Sophia moved into the room, settling into the rocking chair. "I think I've been afraid that any connection to your world would consume him, would turn him into someone I wouldn't recognize. But watching you these past weeks, seeing you actually be present without trying to control everything, I'm starting to believe you can give him the good parts of your legacy without the dangerous parts. I want to give him everything good and keep away everything that could hurt him. I know you do, and I'm starting to trust that you can." Sophia held out her arms for Daniel, and Marco passed him over. "This doesn't mean we're getting back together. Doesn't mean everything is fixed between us. I know. But maybe it means we're building something new, something that works better than what we had before." Marco sat on the floor beside the rocking chair, watching Sophia nurse Daniel in the dim light. "I'd like that. Building something new. It's going to take time and patience, and you continuing to actually change instead of just promising to. I'm committed to it, to being better, being what you both need." Sophia reached out with her free hand, and Marco took it. They sat like that in the quiet apartment, not a romantic couple, not quite friends, but co-parents learning to trust each other, building something new from the ruins of what they'd been. Outside, the city moved through its nighttime rhythms, Marco's empire continuing without his constant attention. But in this moment, his entire world had narrowed to this room, this woman, this child, and for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like everything that mattered. 2 months later, Marco stood in Sophia's apartment helping Daniel through tummy time while Sophia prepared bottles for the day. "I've been thinking about something," Sophia said from the kitchen. "Yeah?" "About your schedule. You've been basically living here for weeks, sleeping on the couch, helping with everything. It doesn't make sense." Marco's heart sank. He'd been waiting for this, for Sophia to decide she needed more space, that his presence was too constant. "If you need me to pull back, that's not what I'm saying." Sophia appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a towel. "I'm saying it doesn't make sense for you to keep sleeping on the couch when there's a perfectly good bedroom going unused." "Sophia, I'm not asking you to move in as my partner. I'm asking you to move in as Daniel's father, as someone who's actually present and helpful and deserves to have a real bed instead of that terrible couch. She paused. We'd need to set boundaries, clear rules about space and privacy, but I think it might be good for Daniel to have you here. And honestly, it's been good for me too. Having help I can count on. Marco looked at Daniel, who was making determined efforts to lift his head during tummy time. His son, 2 months old and already so much more alert, more engaged with the world, growing and changing every day in ways Marco didn't want to miss. Are you sure? He asked. Because once I move in, even with boundaries, it changes things. I know, but things have been changing all along, haven't they? We just keep figuring it out as we go. Sophia smiled. Besides, Mrs. Chen keeps asking when you're going to make an honest woman of me, and I'm tired of explaining our complicated arrangement. What do you tell her? That we're doing what works for us and our son. That not everything has to fit into traditional categories. Sophia moved to sit beside Marco on the floor. That sometimes the best families are the ones built on trust and respect, instead of romance and tradition. Marco reached out tentatively, and Sophia let him pull her into a careful embrace. Not romantic, not claiming, just two people who'd learned to support each other, finding comfort in proximity. Okay, Marco said. I'll move in, as Daniel's father, as your co-parent, with whatever boundaries you need. Thank you. They stayed like that while Daniel continued his tummy time exercises, and Marco realized that this was what Sophia had been trying to tell him all along. That real love, real partnership, wasn't about control or possession. It was about showing up, being present, choosing someone every day, not because you owned them, but because you valued them. He'd lost Sophia as a wife by trying to protect her through control, but he was finding her again as a partner by learning to support her through presence. And in the process, he was becoming the kind of father Daniel deserved, someone who showed up, who helped, who was there for the messy reality of everyday life instead of just the important occasions. It wasn't the life Marco had planned, wasn't the neat outcome his instincts had once demanded. But looking at Sophia and Daniel in the soft morning light of this small apartment, Marco understood that it was something better than any plan could have created. It was real. It was earned. It was built on the hardest lesson Marco had ever learned, that the most powerful thing he could do was choose to let go of power entirely and just be present for the people who mattered most. We don't need you, Sophia had said in that law office so many months ago. She'd been right. They didn't need his power or his control or his carefully managed protection, but they wanted his presence, his support, his commitment to keep showing up, keep trying, keep being better than he'd been before. And that, Marco had finally learned, was worth more than any empire he'd ever built.